Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our sermon series through the Sermon on the Mount. We'll be picking up in verses 19 through 24. In this passage, Jesus here is addressing materialism and greed and how we are to think about these things as his followers. Now, greed comes in many forms. Whether it's a desire for money or cars or things or whatever it is, greed is the craving for more. And we live in a materialistic culture that emphasizes, that pushes, that encourages this behavior. We are driven to acquire more, better, greater. We're not only to keep up with the Joneses, but surpass them. Now, such an attitude stands opposed to the teachings of Jesus. And in today's lesson, Jesus admonishes us that righteous living, and that's what the whole Sermon on the Mount is about. Remember that this is about how to live in the kingdom reflecting God's righteousness. That righteous living means serving God with a single devotion that is undistracted by the desire for more. So let's jump right in, starting in verse 19, going through verse 24. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So, in these verses here, Jesus addresses materialism and greed. It's so easy for us to get caught up in things, in the pursuit of things. And Jesus shows us three things in these verses, three reminders that should help us navigate this in our lives. First, a reminder that what we value will consume us. Second, that our attitude affects our action. And then third, that we must choose who our master will be. Now, our first lesson is what we value will consume us. We can find this in verses 19 through 21. First of all, Jesus instructs us not to store up treasures on earth. The idea here for his disciples and for us is that we are to stop doing this action. So it's not merely don't do this, it's stop doing this. And that's right because it's so easy for us to do. When we store up treasures on earth, we're talking about amassing things, and that could be wealth or those things that make us comfortable, or those collections that we have that we value more than life itself. Now, all of these things are temporal. They're temporary. They will not and they do not last. Jesus points out three destroyers of earthly treasure: moths, rust, and thieves. Now, today there are clothes that are super expensive that are out there. So fashion, high fashion, that sort of thing. But in the ancient world too, garments could be very, very valuable. Especially if they were treated so that they would turn out to be a pure white or a rich purple. Those things that could only really be owned by the very wealthy and royalty. Silk could bring its weight in gold. Now the thing is, with those clothes, a little moth could come in and destroy those garments. Eat holes right through it. The word for moth is also used to reference worms that ate through the parchments and paper and books and stuff like that. So that even if you put all your wealth and thing into property and that's what you went after, one little worm could come along and destroy the title deed and then leave ownership ambiguous. The word for rust here denotes the idea of being eaten away. Now, we often think of rust as, iron being exposed outside, rusting away, being corroded, that sort of thing. But the Greek word here is also used to denote corrosion of precious metals as well. Now, the majority of times it's used, though, it's really interesting, is that it refers to crops being devoured by locusts. So the idea behind all of these pictures is that things can be done away with. A lot of times in ways that are beyond your control. So, leaving something precious outside, it could just corrode away. You put everything in your crops and the locusts come along. You can't control that. It's just coming along. There's nothing you can do. Now, the next way of losing earthly treasures is by thievery. So thieves break in. Now, this is going beyond just a pickpocket or someone smashing a window. The word picture here is for someone, a thief who is actually digging through the mud walls of the houses, breaking through the wall to get inside to steal whatever is of value. You see, everything that the world values is temporary. It doesn't last. It could be eaten away. It could be corroded. It could rust away. It could be stolen. You are not guaranteed to hold on to anything in this life. It doesn't last. Jesus tells us, though, that we, his followers, are to store up treasure in heaven, and that their treasure is eternal. Nothing can eat it away. Nothing can steal it. There's a permanence there that is unknown by anything that this world has to offer. Now, we know how to store up treasure on earth. You make money and you save it. You put it in a savings account. You reinvest it. You stand a chance of losing it there too. You stick it under your mattress. You put it in jars and bury it in your backyard like some of our ancestors used to do. But that's earthly stuff. How do we store up treasure in heaven? Now, one way is that we use our possessions and money, whatever we have of it, for noble purposes, rather than holding on to it as a greedy miser, as an Ebenezer Scrooge. Well, instead we give to the poor. We tithe back to God. We take care of one another when somebody is in need. But the idea of storing up treasure goes far beyond this. It's not just about money. To store up treasure in heaven, one can earn rewards in the Beatitudes. Jesus says that being persecuted brings a reward. There's a reward in the context of loving your enemy. Earlier in chapter 6, Jesus speaks of being rewarded for being generous givers, for honest prayer, for sincere fasting. In 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19, Paul writes, "Instruct those who are rich in this present world, not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed." Now, this doesn't mean that we aren't to plan for the future or set up a retirement plan or have a savings account. No, we're called to be good stewards of what God has given us. The issue here in this passage is the question, are we living for money and things, or are we living for God? Verse 21 gets to this. It's why we are to focus on eternal things rather than temporary things. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, in Jewish thought, the heart was the center of the will and the emotions. It's where desires flowed from, and it's where decisions were made. So Jesus is saying that whatever our treasure is, whatever it is that we value, that's where our hearts turn. That's where that's what we long for. Those are the things that consume us. Now, if our treasures are earthly, we will be consumed by those things that don't last. If, however, our treasures are heavenly, we will be consumed by those things that God values, those things that are eternal. So being a follower of Jesus means that my attitude towards things is this. I am to care more about what really matters, about what pleases God, than what the world outside holds up as valuable. Now, it is this attitude that Jesus looks at in verses 22 and 23, where we find our second lesson that our attitude affects our action. Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body, so then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? the eye is the lamp of the body. By this, Jesus is simply pointing out that it is by the eye that we see. It's how we filter our world. It's how we understand our world. Now, certain people in this world are colorblind. And the most common form of color blindness is red-green color blindness. The inability to determine red and green, and basically it leaves the world in an off-gray color. For those people, that is how they see the world. Now, it's really cool. People have developed these glasses now that people with color blindness can get, and it allows them to see. It corrects the red-green deficiency. So for the first time, a person actually can see the red flower contrasted with the green grass, the color purple, or other vibrant colors. It's changed how they've seen the world. The eye is our filter. And Jesus says that if our eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. And the word for clear here literally means single. As in one, single. So what's Jesus getting at? Well, the single eye here is contrasted with a bad eye in verse 23, which literally is the evil eye. Now, all of this is in the context of teaching on materialism. We have to remember the context. In the Old Testament, when discussing wealth, the eye is often used to describe these attitudes. So an evil eye was a picture for greed, for stinginess, for covetousness. So to have an evil eye means to be greedy, to have a love for money and things above all else. In 1 Timothy 6:10, Paul writes that the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Now, in these same contexts, the word for single, here translated as clear, and then the words that are related to it, often refer to being generous in contrast. So to put all this together then, if we have a single eye, that is a generous, focused attitude toward wealth, and Jesus says your whole body will be full of light. When we put money and things in a proper perspective, then we will experience a wholeness, and we will be the light of the world. God's righteousness flowing through us will be evident. It lights us up and lights out of us. But if we have an evil that eye, that is a greedy attitude towards wealth, Jesus says your whole body will be full of darkness. You will not reflect God's righteousness. Basically, you've covered the eye up like with the dimes in the mountain. You can't see, but no light's also getting in either. 1 Timothy 6:10, Paul, in speaking of greed, writes, "And some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith, and pierced themselves with many griefs." For a believer to follow after money is to deny that Jesus is enough, that God is not sufficient to satisfy. And it is with this attitude that we distance ourselves from God. Now, A.W. Tozer, I just realized I gave away a little illustration earlier. A.W. Tozer, in his book, I Talk Back to the Devil, writes, money often comes between men and God. Someone has said that you can take two small 10-cent pieces, just 2 dimes, and shut out the view of a panoramic landscape. Go to the mountains and just hold 2 coins closely in front of your eyes. The mountains are still there, but you cannot see them at all because there is a dime shutting off the vision in each eye. Now, it doesn't take large quantities of money to come between us and God, just a little. Placed in the wrong position, it will effectively obscure our view. And it's not so much about the money or even the amount, it's the focus that we have on it, our attitude towards it. Because if we're looking at the money and holding it up to our eyes, we're only going to see that. We're not going to see around it. We're not going to see anything else. So what is your attitude toward money? Is money a tool for you? Or is it what you live for? Are you stingy with it, having an eye of evil toward it, or are you generous with it, being singly focused on what pleases God? Now, it's this single focus that Jesus gets at in the next verse, verse 24. He says, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. So here our lesson is that we must choose whom we will serve, and believe it or not, you do have a choice. We are all in service to something or to someone. In the ancient world, it was possible to be a slave with more than one owner, and usually through property being split up or some kind of a partnership agreement. Some Jewish law even developed around this idea. The thing is, the ownership could not be even. One of the masters would have more authority, and the slave would rush to get through with the work that one master ordered so that he could work for the master that he liked. You cannot fully serve two masters. You'll love one more than the other and be more loyal to one than the other, whom you are going to hold in contempt. It is the way of things. If you try to serve two masters, your work will suffer. You will lack focus, and it'll be like having double vision. Now, Jesus lays out the issue here. Materialism is idolatry. You cannot serve God and wealth. The word for wealth here is the Aramaic word mammon, which was carried over into the Greek untranslated. It simply means wealth, but since it was untranslated, the emphasis is that wealth here can become an idol. And God does not brook divided loyalties. If we are pursuing wealth for its own sake, we will not be devoted to God. And if we're pursuing God and his things, we will hold materialism in contempt. So, believer, we are called to be wholeheartedly devoted to pursuing God. If you are more devoted to wealth than to God, you are going to experience trouble, because God is a jealous God, and you are his. And we need to act like it. We are to store up treasures in heaven. We are to let the righteousness of God light us up. We are to choose to be singly focused on serving him. Now, friend, everybody serves somebody. The Bible says that you are either a slave to sin or a slave of God. If you are trusting in the things of this world to bring you happiness and satisfaction, you are going to experience disappointment, because all of those things will fail. But God does want you to find satisfaction in him, because he's the only one who can actually satisfy you. If you have never trusted in Jesus to save you from your sins, to bridge the gap that exists between you and God because of your sins, and we have all sinned, then you cannot be satisfied. It is only through trusting in Jesus that you can experience the forgiveness of sin, the peace of God, the righteousness of God, and the love of God. Only in Jesus will you find all that you need and all that you want. Trust in him. So Joshua, that Old Testament hero, before he died, he called the people of Israel to them, and he issued a challenge to them. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. His challenge is a challenge for us all. Who or what are we serving? The choice is yours. And I hope that you will answer with Joshua, we will serve the Lord. Thank you.